The air on the parade ground at Forward Operating Base Sentinel tasted of diesel fumes and baked earth. It was a flavor Master Chief Petty Officer Kira Blackwood had long ago accepted as a condition of her work. The kind of taste that clung to the back of your throat and reminded you exactly where you were 8,000 miles from home, in a place where the temperature could kill you as efficiently as any enemy combatant. She stood in the third rank motionless. Her small frame, barely 5'4", was a study in perfect stillness
It was out
amidst
there,
the fidgeting
beyond the
of younger
horizon,
soldiers.
where I found
Her
my
navy
purpose.
working uniform, crisp and utilitarian, was a dark blue island in a sea of desert camouflage. She was an anomaly here, and she knew it. A sailor in an army base. A woman among predominantly men. A technician among trigger pullers. But anomalies, Kira had learned, were often the most valuable pieces of intelligence. The pattern that didn't fit. The signal that shouldn't be there. The whisper in the storm. 72 hours earlier, she had been that anomaly's hunter. The memory came to her unbidden as she stood at attention, eyes fixed on the middle distance. The windowless container that served as her operations center. The bank of 6 monitors glowing in the darkness like a constellation of artificial stars. The hum of cooling fans and the faint ozone smell of overworked electronics. That was her battlefield, not this parade ground with its flags and speeches, not the mountains and valleys where men with rifles hunted other men with rifles. Her war was fought in the invisible spaces between antennas, in the electromagnetic spectrum that most people couldn't even perceive, let alone understand. Operation Serpent's Coil had been her masterpiece. 3 months of work. 72 days of sifting through terabytes of meaningless static searching for a ghost. They called him the Viper. Real name unknown, nationality uncertain, age estimated somewhere between 30 and 50. He was number 7 on the FBI's most wanted list for international terrorism, responsible for at least 4 major attacks, possibly involved in a dozen more. He moved through the digital landscape like smoke, leaving no traces, no patterns, no errors. Until he did. The error had been microscopic. A timing anomaly in a burst transmission lasting 0.03 milliseconds. Most analysis software would have dismissed it as atmospheric noise. Most human analysts would never have noticed it at all. But Kira wasn't most analysts. She had spent the last 72 hours teaching her custom algorithm to listen not for what was being said, but for the unique electronic signature of the hardware doing the saying. Every piece of communications equipment had flaws, imperfections in the crystal oscillator, delays in the power amplifier. These created a recurring error pattern, invisible to anyone looking at the message content, but clear as a fingerprint if you knew how to look at the carrier wave itself. She had found the Viper's fingerprint at 0347 Zulu on the morning of the operation. The memory of that moment was crystalline. The sudden resolution of chaos into pattern, the single thread of light on her screen, pulsing with a steady, rhythmic beat. A digital heartbeat buried 7 layers deep in random noise. She had cross-referenced it with thermal imaging from an RQ-170 Sentinel drone she had requisitioned to the area. The building showed a heat signature consistent with multiple occupants and significant electronic equipment in a sublevel basement. She had passed the coordinates to the task force command at 0441 Zulu. A single building, a specific address, nothing more. No elaborate intelligence brief. No probabilistic analysis. Just coordinates and a confidence level of 97%. Alpha Company had dispatched at 0515. They had breached at 0543. At 0602, the Viper was in custody. 3 of his lieutenants captured alongside him. 0 American casualties. 0 civilian casualties. A textbook operation, because she had pointed them to the exact right door. The memory faded as General Marcus Brennan's voice boomed across the parade ground, amplified by speakers that crackled in the dry heat. He was a man carved from a recruiting poster, all jawline and confidence and squared-away uniform. A 4-star general who believed victory was a matter of volume and aggression and boots on the ground. His chest was a tapestry of ribbons and medals earned over 3 decades of service. His speech was a predictable symphony of valor, sacrifice, and the indomitable American spirit. Kira listened to the cadence, not the words. She analyzed it like a signal. Predictable modulation, high amplitude, low information density. She had heard this speech before in various forms from various men in various places. The content changed, but the structure remained the same. Warriors, heroes, the fight, always the fight. As if war were a simple equation of courage plus firepower equals victory. She knew better. Finally, the awards portion began. Names were called, citations read, soldiers marched forward with proud, nervous energy. They received their medals with smiles that tried to hide how much it meant to them. They shook the general's hand for the waiting cameras. They returned to their places with a new weight on their chests and in their hearts. Then the announcer called her name, Master Chief Petty Officer Kira Blackwood. She moved with an economy of motion that was often mistaken for hesitation. It wasn't hesitation, it was efficiency. She walked to the center. Mark halted with precision and executed a salute that would have satisfied the most demanding drill instructor. General Brennan looked down at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or assessment, or something closer to disdain. He was 6'2". She was 5'4". The physical disparity was obvious, and she had learned long ago that some men found it impossible to see past that single fact. He took the citation from his aide, a tall captain with the bearing of someone who had learned to mirror his superior's attitudes. Master Chief Petty Officer Blackwood, Brennan began, his voice losing some of its booming warmth, is awarded the Bronze Star Medal for meritorious service. He paused. The pause was deliberate. Kira recognized it as a rhetorical technique, a way of signaling to the audience that what came next deserved special attention. For providing critical signals, intelligence support during Operation Serpent's Coil, leading to the successful neutralization of a high-value enemy network. The language was sterile, bureaucratic. It was the only language cleared to describe what she actually did. Classified operations couldn't be explained in detail on a parade ground with media present, so they used words like support and intelligence. Words that to a man like Brennan sounded passive, secondary, safe. He looked from the paper to her, then to the assembled task force and the embedded media pool positioned at the edge of the formation. She could see him making a calculation, weighing options, seeing an opportunity. He put the citation down on the small table beside him. In my day, he began his voice, adopting a folksy, almost conversational tone that somehow managed to carry across the entire parade ground. Support meant you were miles from the wire, safe and sound. It meant you were pushing paper while real soldiers were pushing the fight. A few chuckles rippled through the ranks. Nervous laughter from men who weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh, but didn't want to risk not laughing. Kira's expression remained unchanged. Her eyes, dark blue and steady, were fixed on the middle distance as protocol dictated. She had learned long ago that the best response to provocation was no response at all. Emotion was noise. Facts were signal. This operation, Brennan declared, his voice rising with the confidence of a man who believed his own narrative was won by trigger pullers, by the infantrymen who kicked in the doors, by the men whose boots were on the ground, whose bodies were on the line. He picked up the velvet box containing her medal. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and looked at the bronze star glinting within. The sunlight caught the bronze and made it glow against the dark velvet. Then he snapped it shut. The sound was sharp, final. It carried across the parade ground like a gunshot. The low hum of the bass generator seemed to fall silent. The fidgeting stopped. Every eye was locked on the general and the small woman standing before him. "We reserve these," Brennan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl that the microphones caught and amplified for the warriors at the tip of the spear. He unpinned the medal from its cushion inside the box. The gesture was slow, almost ceremonial. Then, in an act of profound and public contempt, he slipped it into the breast pocket of his own uniform. We'll find a more appropriate recipient for this. Someone who was actually in the fight. He looked directly at Kira. There was a challenge in his eyes, an expectation. He was waiting for a reaction, a protest, tears, anger, anything that would validate his dominance, that would confirm his assessment of her as someone who didn't belong, who couldn't handle the pressure, who was too soft for this world of hard men and harder choices. He received nothing. Master Chief Kira Blackwood held her salute for one more perfect second. Her hand was steady. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. Then she dropped the salute, cleanly performed a flawless about-face, and walked off the parade ground. She did not look back. She did not hurry. She simply walked, her footsteps crunching on the gravel with a steady metronomic rhythm. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden vast silence that had fallen over the assembly. The cameras kept rolling. They captured the rigid line of her back, the deliberate pace of her stride, the way she disappeared into the heat shimmer without once turning around or breaking her bearing. Behind her, the silence stretched and deepened. It was the silence of profound discomfort, the silence of men who had just witnessed something that felt wrong but couldn't quite articulate why. Some of them had served with Kira. Some had seen her work. They knew in ways the general clearly didn't, that what had just happened was not a correction of an error, but an error in itself. In the third row, Colonel Nathaniel Drummond stood perfectly still. He was 65 years old, a veteran of Desert Storm, a man who had seen combat when combat meant something different than it did now. His weathered face was carefully neutral, but his hands clasped behind his back were clenched into fists. He had spoken with Kira that morning before the ceremony. He had told her it was the finest piece of intelligence work he had seen since the Gulf War in '91, when SIGINT had been the invisible hand that guided every successful strike. He had told her she deserved that medal, that her work had saved American lives. Now, he watched her walk away, stripped of recognition, humiliated in front of her peers and subordinates, and he knew with the certainty of long experience that General Marcus Brennan had just made a catastrophic mistake. Not because he had insulted Kira Blackwood, but because he had revealed to anyone who was paying attention that he fundamentally did not understand the nature of modern warfare. Kira reached her quarters without conscious awareness of the journey. Muscle memory carried her through the maze of shipping containers and temporary structures that made up the living areas of FOB Sentinel. Her container was in the far corner of the base, deliberately positioned away from the main flow of traffic. She had requested that location when she arrived. Privacy was essential for her work. The container was divided into two sections. The front half was her living space, a narrow bunk, a small desk, a locker for her personal effects. Spartan and functional. The back half was her workspace, separated by a heavy curtain and secured with a cipher lock that changed daily. She entered the living space and closed the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, perfectly still, and allowed herself to feel what she had not permitted herself to feel on the parade ground. Nothing. There was no rage, no humiliation, no wounded pride. There was only a cold, crystalline clarity, a recognition of a pattern, a problem that required a solution. She sat at her small steel desk and powered on her hardened laptop. The machine booted without a sound, its screen glowing in the dim light of the container. She accessed the secure network and downloaded the official video feed from the ceremony. Her fingers moved with practiced speed across the keyboard, executing commands that would have looked like gibberish to anyone watching over her shoulder. She isolated the relevant segment, from the moment her name was called to the moment she exited the frame. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. She saved the high-definition clip to a triple encrypted solid-state drive. Then she cross-referenced the media roster for the event, noting the names and affiliations of every journalist present. Associated Press, Reuters, Fox News, The New York Times, Stars and Stripes, all witnesses, all with cameras, all with footage. She opened a new file, a simple text document that served as her personal log. The cursor blinked on the empty screen waiting. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the same efficiency she brought to everything she did. Date, October 23, 2012. Time, 14:37 Zulu. Location, Phoebe Sentinel Parade Ground. Incident Public Awards Ceremony. Presiding Officer General M. Brennan, USA. Event recipient, a Bronze Star Medal, citation for Operation Serpent's Coil. General Brennan publicly questioned the validity of the award, citing a distinction between combat and support roles. He retained the physical medal, stating it would be given to a more appropriate recipient. Official video and media witnesses documented the event. Action taken. Withdrew from ceremony, filed this log. She saved the file. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. There was no emotion in the words, only facts. The facts were sufficient. The system she served was built on process and documentation. An emotional outburst was noise easily dismissed. A documented procedural breach was a signal clear and persistent. It could be ignored for a time, but it would remain in the logs waiting. And in a system built on accountability and chain of command, waiting documentation was a time bomb with a very long fuse. With the report filed, she felt the need for a different kind of clarity, the kind that came from physical pressure and enforced silence. She changed into a plain black swimsuit and a pair of worn training shorts. She pulled a towel from her locker and walked across the base to the Combat Diver Training Facility. The facility was a large metal building that housed a deep cylindrical pool, 20 feet at its deepest point. The water was a cold, chlorinated blue that looked almost artificial under the fluorescent lights. It was usually empty at this time of day. Most people were at lunch or in meetings or doing the 1,000 small tasks that made up military life in a forward operating base. Kira stood at the edge of the pool. She regulated her breathing. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 6 counts out, hold for 2, repeat. It was a pattern like everything else, a rhythm that calmed the nervous system and prepared the body for controlled stress. She executed a simple feet-first entry, slicing into the water with minimal splash. The cold was a welcome shock, a sensory reset that stripped away everything except the immediate physical reality of pressure and temperature and the body's response to both. She sank to the bottom and settled into a cross-legged position on the smooth concrete floor. The world above vanished. The harsh sunlight, the dust, the noise of the base, the general's voice, all of it was replaced by a deep, resonant silence broken only by the sound of her own controlled breathing. The pressure of the water was a uniform, comforting weight on her entire body. Here, there were no politics, no egos, no grandstanding generals who confused volume with leadership. There were only the laws of physics, buoyancy, pressure, the body's demand for oxygen. She began a breath hold drill. Standard combat diver training. Exhale slowly. Hold. Feel the carbon dioxide building in the bloodstream. Feel the body's increasingly urgent demand for air. Observe it. Analyze it. Do not react to it. She was not a support person. She was a weapon system whose primary components were pattern recognition and an absolute mastery of the electromagnetic spectrum. General Brennan saw a small woman who worked with computers. He could not comprehend a battlefield measured in hertz and decibels where victory could be won by isolating a single packet timing anomaly in a terabyte of meaningless static. He could not imagine a fight that took place in the invisible space between antennas where the enemy was a signal and the weapon was mathematics. His failure of imagination was not her problem. It was, however, now a documented fact. She surfaced her lungs, burning her mind clear. She repeated the descent, the ritual of pressure and release, washing away the last vestiges of what had happened on the parade ground. It was not an insult to her. It was a flaw in the general's understanding of modern warfare. And flaws in her world were liabilities to be identified, analyzed, and corrected. After an hour in the pool, she returned to her quarters. She showered in the communal facilities, washing away the chlorine and the last physical traces of the ceremony. Then she returned to her living space and began the second ritual of her daily routine, cleaning her rifle. It was not the standard issue M4 carbine that most personnel carried. It was a specialized Macmillan TAC 338 chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, a tool for conversations held across a mile of intervening air. The weapon was a masterpiece of precision engineering, and she maintained it with a reverence that some people reserved for prayer. She spread a clean mat on her bunk and disassembled the rifle with practiced efficiency. Each component was laid out in perfect order. Bolt assembly, trigger group, barrel, stock. Each piece was a small miracle of metallurgy and design. She cleaned every surface, removing microscopic grains of dust with a soft cloth and a single drop of hops number 9. The smell was incense, sharp and chemical, and oddly comforting. It was the smell of maintenance, of care, of ensuring that when the moment came, the tool would perform exactly as designed. The precise mechanical clicks as she reassembled the weapon were a calming mantra. This too was a system governed by physics. Muzzle velocity, ballistic coefficient, spin drift, the Coriolis effect. There was no ego in a ballistics table. There was only truth. Input the variables correctly, and the equations would tell you exactly where the bullet would go. She finished the reassembly and performed a functions check. Everything moved smoothly, precisely. She locked the rifle in its case and secured it in her locker. Only then did she allow herself to think about what came next. The provocation, when it came 2 days later, was as clumsy and predictable as Brennan's ceremony speech. It happened in the main dining facility, a cavernous room that buzzed with the clatter of trays and the murmur of hundreds of conversations. The DFAC was the social heart of the base, where rank mattered less, and exhaustion was the great equalizer. Kira sat alone at a small table in the corner. She was eating methodically, her focus divided between her meal and the field manual she was reading. FM 313. Information Operations. It was dry material, but thoroughness was a habit she had cultivated over 15 years of service. She sensed them before she saw them. A change in the ambient noise level. A subtle shift in the attention of the people around her. She looked up from her manual. 2 Army captains were approaching her table. They moved with a proprietary swagger, their trays held like shields. She recognized them from the ceremony. Captain Vance Caldwell and Captain Troy Garrison. General Brennan's personal staff. His aides, his enablers, his echo chamber. Caldwell was the taller of the two, just over 6 feet, with the kind of symmetrical features and confident bearing that had probably served him well throughout his life. Garrison was shorter, but broader built, like a football player, with a neck that seemed to merge directly into his shoulders. They reached her table and stopped. Caldwell smirked down at her. "Well, well," he said, his voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "If it isn't Master Chief almost got a medal." Garrison snickered. It was an ugly sound, juvenile and mean. Kira did not look up from her book. She slowly turned a page. Caldwell's smirk tightened. Her lack of reaction was an irritant, a challenge to his dominance in this small social ecosystem. "What's the matter, Chief? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just busy writing a strongly worded email about how your feelings got hurt?" "Leave her alone, Captain," the voice came from a nearby table. Gunnery Sergeant Deanna Wolfe, 42 years old, her face a roadmap of hard deployments and harder training. She was a Marine Corps Scout sniper instructor, one of the few women to hold that position. Her eyes, pale green and utterly level, were fixed on Caldwell. Caldwell shot her a venomous look. "Mind your business, Gunny. This is an officer-to-enlisted conversation." He turned back to Kira, his arrogance inflated by the minor challenge. "The general was right, you know. They hand out medals like candy these days. Dilutes the meaning for the real fighters." Kira carefully placed her fork on her tray. She closed her book, marking her page with a napkin. She still had not made eye contact with them. She prepared to stand and leave. Avoidance was the primary de-escalation tactic. Remove yourself from the situation. Deny the aggressor the confrontation they were seeking. But Caldwell, misinterpreting her silence as weakness and her movement as flight, decided to escalate. He reached out and placed a heavy, condescending hand on her shoulder, intending to stop her from rising. "Hey," he said, his voice thick with false friendliness. "I'm not done talking to you, sailor." It was a tactical error of catastrophic proportions. The instant his fingers made contact, Kira's entire posture shifted. She did not tense up. She seemed to flow like water, adapting to the shape of a new container. Her center of gravity dropped by inches. Her left hand came up not to strike, but to gently cover his hand on her shoulder, her thumb pressing a precise point on the radial nerve at his wrist. Simultaneously, Her body pivoted, not away from him, but into him, using his own forward momentum against him. His confident push became an uncontrolled stumble. Her other hand secured his elbow. It was not a punch or a grab. It was a simple, fluid redirection. His arm was now locked bent at an angle. Evolution had never intended. His own body weight was creating the strain. His 6-foot frame was held powerless by a woman 8 inches shorter and 60 pounds lighter. All without a single blow being thrown. The entire sequence from contact to control had taken less than 2 seconds. The clatter in the dining facility died. Trays stopped moving. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every eye in the massive room was locked on the silent drama unfolding in the corner. Kira applied a whisper of additional pressure to the joint lock. Caldwell let out a strangled gasp, his face contorting with sudden blinding pain. She leaned in slightly, her voice low and devoid of all emotion. It was not a threat. It was a statement of observable fact. "Do not touch me again." She released him as smoothly as she had taken control. Captain Caldwell staggered back, clutching his arm, his face a mixture of agony and utter humiliation. His partner Garrison stood frozen, his mouth half open, his confidence evaporated. Kira calmly picked up her book. She picked up her tray. She looked at neither of them. She walked to the tray return window, deposited her dishes with the same care she gave to everything, and exited the dining facility without a backward glance. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then a low murmur started spreading like a ripple across the surface of a still pond. In the corner, Gunnery Sergeant Deanna Wolfe slowly shook her head. There was a look of grim, profound respect on her weathered face. She had seen Kira shoot on the range 2 years ago at Fort Bragg, an inter-service marksmanship competition. Kira had printed sub-minute of angle groups at 1,500 meters in a 15-knot crosswind. Wolfe had always known she was more than she appeared. Now, everyone else in the room knew it too. The narrative had begun to shift. The quiet Navy chief was no longer just a victim of the general's contempt. She was a mystery, a question mark in a uniform. Someone who clearly possessed skills that went far beyond typing on a keyboard in a climate-controlled room. And mysteries in a military environment had a way of demanding answers. Commander David Reed rubbed his temples and watched the video loop for the 7th time on his monitor. The footage was clear, undeniable, and a massive procedural headache that was about to land squarely on his desk. An Army captain, a general's aide no less, had been publicly and efficiently dismantled by one of his master chiefs in front of approximately 200 witnesses and at least a dozen recording devices. The video quality was excellent. Multiple angles, synchronized timestamps, clear audio. Someone had already edited together a compilation that showed the incident from 3 different perspectives simultaneously. It had the production value of a training video, which Reed found oddly unsettling. That level of technical competence suggested someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He had a strong suspicion about who that someone was. Reed was 42 years old, a career naval officer who had come up through the intelligence community. He understood the world Kira Blackwood inhabited in ways that most surface warfare officers did not. He knew that intelligence work was not passive. It was not support in the way General Brennan seemed to understand the term. It was an active hunt, a predatory analysis of patterns and anomalies, and the people who excelled at it possessed a particular kind of ruthless focus. Kira Blackwood possessed that focus in abundance. There was a knock at his door. Sharp, precise, exactly 3 raps. He knew that knock. Enter. The door opened, and Master Chief Blackwood stepped inside. She was in her working uniform, every crease perfect, every element in its exact regulation position. She closed the door behind her and stood at parade rest in front of his desk, her hands clasped at the small of her back, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above his left shoulder. "Master Chief," Reed began, trying to find the right tone. Not quite sympathetic, not quite stern. "I've reviewed the footage from the dining facility." "Yes, sir." Captain Caldwell has filed a formal complaint. Assault. I understand, Commander. Her voice was perfectly calm. No defensiveness, no anxiety, just acknowledgement of fact. Reed gestured at his screen, where the video was paused at the moment of contact. I have to file a report, Master Chief. This is going to go up the chain. You understand that? Yes, sir. Captain Caldwell claims you attacked him without provocation. That is an inaccurate statement, sir. I know it is, Reed said, allowing some of his own frustration to show. I have eyes. I can see what actually happened. But I still have to follow procedure. I need your official statement. Kira reached into her pocket and produced a small gray data chip. She placed it on his desk with the same precision she brought to every physical action. My statement is on this drive, sir. It is a text file timestamped and digitally signed. Reed picked up the chip, his curiosity piqued. And what else is on here? The unedited source footage from the 3 dining facility security cameras covering the incident synchronized into a single timeline. Audio recordings from 4 personal devices in the immediate vicinity, which I was able to isolate and enhance. Their metadata confirms they were actively recording. A topographical map of the dining facility indicating the positions of all parties, and at least 15 witnesses, ranks and names included, and a frame-by-frame analysis of the physical contact demonstrating that Captain Caldwell initiated unwanted physical contact, and that my response utilized minimal force necessary to neutralize a perceived physical threat consistent with established rules of engagement for personal defense. Reed stared at the data chip in his hand. It was not a statement. It was a complete evidentiary package assembled with the speed and ruthless efficiency of a counterintelligence operation. He had known Kira for 18 months, had worked with her on 3 separate operations, and he thought he understood her capabilities. He was beginning to realize he had only scratched the surface. Master Chief, he said, a new note of something like respect entering his voice. When exactly did you prepare all of this? I began compilation approximately 30 minutes after the incident, sir. Total preparation time was 2 hours and 40 minutes. You compiled security footage, isolated audio from personal devices, created a tactical map, and performed frame-by-frame analysis in less than 3 hours. Yes, sir. Reed plugged the drive into his computer. Everything she had described was there, perfectly organized, professionally presented. He opened her statement. It was 3 sentences long, as precise and unadorned as a schematic diagram. At 18:05, Zulu Captain Caldwell and Captain Garrison approached my table in the dining facility. Captain Caldwell made unsolicited verbal contact of a harassing nature. He then initiated unsolicited physical contact by placing his hand on my shoulder. I responded with a standard joint control maneuver to ensure my safety and disengage. I then vacated the area to avoid further confrontation. Reed read it twice. There was no emotion in the text, no editorializing, just observable facts presented in chronological order. It was, he realized, exactly how an intelligence analyst would write a report. Strip away bias, present data. Let the facts speak for themselves. All right, Master Chief, he said finally. I'll attach this to my report and forward it up the chain. You are confined to quarters pending review. No contact with Captain Caldwell or Captain Garrison. Understood. Understood, Commander. She saluted. He returned it. She executed a perfect about-face and left his office. Reed sat alone with the data chip and the video footage in a growing sense that something much larger than a dining facility altercation was unfolding. He had been in the intelligence community long enough to recognize the difference between a reaction and a strategy. What Master Chief Blackwood had just handed him was not the work of someone who had been caught off guard and was scrambling to defend herself. It was the work of someone who had been prepared, someone who had anticipated exactly this kind of escalation and had already assembled the tools to respond. He forwarded the package to Admiral Emmett Thornhill, the theater commander. Then he sat back and waited for the storm he knew was coming. The storm took 3 days to arrive. During those 3 days, Kira remained in her quarters as ordered. She used the time productively. She caught up on technical reading. She refined some of her analysis algorithms. She worked through a series of contingency scenarios, mental exercises that kept her mind sharp, and she searched. The classified network had layers of access compartmentalized by clearance level and need to know. Kira's clearance was high, but not unlimited. There were entire categories of information she could not access directly. But clearance was not the only tool in an intelligence analyst's kit. Sometimes the absence of information was itself informative. Sometimes you could map the shape of classified data by looking at what surrounded it, the way astronomers could detect invisible planets by watching the wobble of visible stars. She was looking for information about Operation Desert Hawk. It had been a raid in 2009 in the tribal areas of Pakistan near the Afghan border. The official record was sparse. 12 American casualties. Mission classified as partially successful. Target package secured, but at heavy cost. Equipment failure cited as contributing factor. Kira had been on the intelligence team for that operation. She had provided signals, intelligence indicating the target was at a specific compound. But her analysis had been flagged as low confidence due to atmospheric interference. The commanding officer had made the decision to proceed anyway, but to a secondary location that aerial reconnaissance suggested might be the actual target site. That commanding officer had been Colonel Marcus Brennan. The raid on the secondary location had been a disaster. The compound was heavily fortified and defended by a larger force than anticipated. The firefight had lasted 4 hours. 12 Americans dead, 17 wounded. The target himself had escaped in the confusion. 3 days later, Pakistani forces had raided the original compound Kira had identified. They found evidence that the target had been there, but he had fled when he learned of the American raid nearby. Kira had been right. Her low-confidence assessment had been due to technical limitations, not analytical error. But by the time that became clear, 12 people were already dead. One of them had been Lieutenant Rebecca Morgan. The memory came to her with perfect clarity the way painful memories often did. Becca, blonde hair usually pulled back in a regulation bun, quick smile, terrible jokes. They had gone through advanced signals, training together, had deployed together twice. Becca had been the closest thing to a best friend Kira had allowed herself in the military. Becca had been in the assault team. She had taken a round through the chest in the first 30 seconds of the firefight. She had bled out before the medevac could arrive. Kira had requested access to the after-action report, but it had been sealed at a classification level above her clearance. She had been told it was standard procedure for operations with that level of casualties. She had been told there would be a lessons learned analysis. She had been told that her input might be requested. She had never been contacted. Now, 3 years later, she understood why. The after-action report would have revealed that Brennan had overridden intelligence assessment. It would have documented a command decision that resulted in catastrophic failure. That kind of documentation could end a career, or at least significantly damage one, unless it was sealed, classified, buried under layers of need-to-know restrictions. Kira could not access the report itself, but she could access the metadata around it: classification date, reviewing authorities, access logs. She could see who had requested the high classification level and who had approved it. The trail led back to General Marcus Brennan. She sat in her darkened workspace, the glow of her monitors, the only light, and felt the pattern resolve with crystalline clarity. This was not about a medal. This had never been about a medal. Brennan had recognized her name at the ceremony. He had remembered Operation Desert Hawk, remembered that she had been the intelligence analyst who had provided the assessment he had ignored. The medal ceremony had been an opportunity to discredit her, to establish a public narrative that she was not a reliable operator, that her work was mere support, secondary, and ultimately unimportant. It was prophylactic damage control. If she ever tried to question what had happened in 2009, there would already be a counter-narrative in place. She was not a credible analyst. She was someone who had almost received a medal. Almost, not quite. Not really deserving. Kira saved her findings to an encrypted file. Then she powered down her system and sat in the darkness thinking. She had two choices. She could let it go, file the paperwork, take whatever administrative action resulted from the dining facility incident and move on with her career. That was the safe choice, the smart choice by some measures. Or she could pursue this, dig deeper, bring to light what had been deliberately buried. That was the dangerous choice, the career-ending choice potentially. It would make enemies. It would burn bridges. But 12 people had died because of a command decision that had ignored intelligence. One of those people had been her friend, and the man responsible for that decision was now attempting to discredit her, to preemptively undermine her credibility. The choice, when framed that way, was not really a choice at all. There was a knock on her door the next morning. She opened it to find Gunnery Sergeant Deanna Wolfe standing in the harsh sunlight, squinting slightly. "Master Chief," Wolfe said. "Got a minute?" "Of course, Gunny. Come in." Wolfe entered, and Kira closed the door behind her. The Marine looked around the small living space with the quick, assessing gaze of someone trained to evaluate threat environments. Her eyes lingered on the locked door to the workspace. "I'll cut to the chase," Wolfe said. "What happened in the DFAC the other day? That wasn't lucky. That was trained. Basic defensive tactics, Gunny. All personnel received that training. Don't bullshit me, Master Chief. I've been teaching hand-to-hand for 15 years. What you did to Caldwell was Krav Maga or something close to it. High-level stuff. And you executed it with the kind of calm that comes from doing it under stress, not just in a training room." Kira said nothing. Wolfe continued. "I know who you are. Or at least I know more than most people do. Fort Bragg 2010. Inter-service marksmanship competition. I was there as a coach for the Marine team. You were shooting for Navy. I watched you put 5 rounds into a 4-inch group at 1,500 meters, 15-knot crosswind. You adjusted for spin drift and Coriolis like it was second nature. Then you packed up your rifle and left before the awards ceremony. I had other commitments. You won the whole damn thing, and you didn't stay for the trophy." Wolfe shook her head. "That told me something. Told me you weren't doing it for recognition. You were doing it to test yourself against the standard. Is there a point to this, Gunny?" Wolfe met her eyes. "The point is that I've been around long enough to recognize when someone is more than they appear. You're not just a technician. You're an operator. Maybe not in the traditional door-kicking sense, but an operator nonetheless. And what Brennan did at that ceremony wasn't just disrespectful. It was stupid. He made an enemy without even knowing it. I'm not anyone's enemy, Gunny. Maybe not. But you're something. And whatever you are, Brennan should have been smart enough to leave you alone." Wolfe reached into her pocket and pulled out a patch. It was the iconic emblem of the United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper Program. A skull, superimposed over crosshairs with the motto "One shot, one kill" embroidered below. It was a symbol of extreme proficiency, an insignia of a brotherhood earned through immense hardship and skill. She held it out to Kira. "The guys at the schoolhouse, we heard about what you did. Not the DFAC thing, the other thing. Finding that needle in a haystack full of needles. That level of precision, that's marksmanship. Different kind of target, different kind of tool, but the same fundamental skill. One shot, one kill. That's what you did. You took one shot at finding that ghost, and you hit center mass." Kira looked at the patch, then at Wolfe. She understood the depth of the gesture. It was the highest form of professional respect the Marine could offer. An acknowledgement that transcended service branch, that spoke to a shared understanding of what it meant to be a master of a craft. She reached into her own pocket and retrieved a patch she carried but rarely displayed. It was a simple black circle. In the center was a stylized phoenix, its wings made of radio waves rising from flames. Below it, embroidered in silver thread, was a Latin motto, Fides in Tenebris, faith in darkness. It was the insignia of a program so classified that most people in the intelligence community knew it only as rumor. The Ghost Program. Deep Cover Signals Intelligence. 12 people had made it through the selection and training in the program's 15-year history. 4 of them were dead now. She took Wolfe's patch and handed the Marine her own. No words were needed. The exchange was a treaty of mutual respect between two masters of their respective crafts, a recognition that skill transcended politics and rank and service rivalry. Wolf studied the Phoenix patch for a long moment. Then she looked up at Kira. Ghost program, I'll be damned. I'd heard stories, but I thought they were bullshit. They're not bullshit? No, Wolf said quietly. I guess they're not, which makes what Brennan did even more idiotic. He picked a fight with a ghost. I'm not fighting anyone, Gunny. Maybe not yet, but I've been in this business long enough to know how these things work. Brennan embarrassed you publicly. He's going to hear about the DFAS incident, and he's going to feel like you embarrassed him in return. Men, like that, they escalate. They can't help themselves. Then I'll deal with that when it happens. Wolf nodded slowly. Fair enough. But if you need anything, if this goes sideways, you know where to find me. Marines look after Marines, but we also look after people who can shoot. And Master Chief, you can definitely shoot. After Wolf left, Kira sat with the scout sniper patch in her hand. She had operated alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be recognized by a peer. Not a superior offering, praise, or a subordinate offering respect, but an equal acknowledging skill. It was a dangerous feeling. It made you want things. Connection, belonging, understanding. She put the patch in her locker and locked it away. Wanting things made you vulnerable. And vulnerability was a liability she could not afford. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains and turned the sky the color of blood and brass, Colonel Nathaniel Drummond found her at the shooting range. The range was empty at this hour, the heat finally fading to something almost tolerable. Kira was prone behind her rifle, working through a series of calculations in a weatherproof notebook. Drummond approached slowly, making noise so she would hear him coming. He had been in combat long enough to know that you never surprised someone with their hands near a weapon. Master Chief, he said when he was 10 feet away. She looked up from her notebook. Colonel Drummond, mind if I join you? It's a free range, sir. Drummond sat down on the shooting bench nearby. He was in his mid-60s, but he moved like a younger man, with the deliberate care of someone who had learned to manage old injuries. His face was weathered and lined a topographical map of 3 decades of service in hot, dusty places. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Drummond watched the sun sink lower. Kira returned to her calculations. I was at the ceremony, Drummond said finally. I saw what Brennan did. A lot of people saw what he did, sir. Yeah, but not everyone understood what they were seeing. I did. I've been doing this job since before you were born, Master Chief. I know the difference between combat intelligence and wishful thinking. What you did in Serpent's Coil, that was textbook SIGINT work. Better than textbook. That was artistry. Kira said nothing. Drummond continued. I did similar work in Desert Storm. Different technology, same basic principle. Find the signal in the noise. We used radio triangulation and pattern analysis to map Saddam's entire command structure. Every successful strike we made, every objective we took, it started with intelligence. With people like you, sitting in dark rooms listening to static, finding the patterns no one else could see. Okay, then. That was a different war, sir. Was it? I'm not so sure. The tools change. The technology gets better. But the fundamentals remain the same. You need to know where the enemy is before you can engage them. That's intelligence. That's what you do. And any commander who doesn't understand that, who dismisses it as mere support, that commander is living in a fantasy. Kira closed her notebook. With respect, sir, why are you telling me this? Drummond looked at her directly. Because I'm worried you're going to do something that will end your career. I saw your face at that ceremony. Most people saw nothing. But I've been reading people's faces for a long time. You weren't hurt. You weren't angry. You were analyzing. And that's what worries me. Because people like you, when you start analyzing something, you don't stop until you've mapped every angle. I'm not planning anything, sir. No. Then why were you accessing metadata on Operation Desert Hawk yesterday? Kira's expression didn't change, but inside her mind was racing. Drummond saw her reaction, or lack thereof, and nodded. Don't worry, I'm not going to report you. I have access to the same audit logs you do. I saw the requests, and I know what you're looking for, because I've been looking at the same thing for 3 years. Sir. Drummond leaned forward, his voice dropping. Desert Hawk was a clusterfuck, Master Chief. 12 good people died because Brennan ignored intelligence and trusted his gut. I was the J2. At the time, the intelligence director for the task force. I tried to get that after-action report declassified so we could do a proper lessons learned. Brennan blocked it, classified it at a level that put it out of reach for normal review. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that you weren't wrong. Your analysis was solid. Becca Morgan died because a commander made a bad decision, not because you gave bad intelligence. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that there are people who remember, who know what actually happened. Kira felt something crack inside her just slightly, a hairline fracture in the careful control she maintained. She had carried the weight of Desert Hawk for 3 years, had wondered if her analysis had been flawed, if she had missed something, if there was some way she could have been more certain, more convincing. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. Don't thank me. I should have fought harder at the time. I should have gone over Brennan's head. I didn't, and I've regretted it every day since. Drummond stood up, his knees cracking slightly. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Brennan has friends. He has a network. Men like him always do. They protect each other because they know they all have secrets worth protecting. I'll keep that in mind, sir. Drummond started to leave, then turned back. One more thing. Admiral Thornhill is reviewing the DFAC incident. He's a good man, fair. He was Navy intelligence before he moved to command. He'll understand what you do in ways Brennan never could. When this goes to inquiry, and it will tell him the truth, all of it, he'll listen. Then he was gone, walking back toward the main base, his silhouette dark against the fading light. Kira sat alone on the range as the sky turned from brass to purple to black. The stars began to emerge sharp and clear in the desert air. She thought about Desert Hawk, about Becca, about 12 people who had died because intelligence had been ignored. She thought about Brennan, about the medal in his pocket, about the way he had looked at her with contempt and dismissal, and she thought about what Drummond had said, that there were people who remembered, who knew the truth. The inquiry would come. She would tell the truth. And the system, for all its flaws, would either correct itself or it wouldn't. But she would do her part. She would present the facts, document the evidence, and let the signal speak for itself. It was all she had ever done. It was all she knew how to do. The summons came on a cold morning, delivered by a Marine corporal who looked far too young to be stationed 8,000 miles from home. Commander Reed handed Kira the orders with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and carefully neutral. USS Ronald Reagan, he said. Strategic Operations Center. You're to report at 0800 tomorrow. Full dress uniform. Admiral Thornhill is convening a formal inquiry. Kira took the orders and read them carefully. The language was bureaucratic and precise, but the implications were clear. This was not going to be a simple administrative review of the dining facility incident. This was going to be comprehensive. Understood, Commander. Master Chief, Reed said, his voice dropping slightly. Admiral Thornhill requested your complete service record, all of it, including classified deployments. He also requested the full case file on Operation Serpent's Coil and Operation Desert Hawk. Kira met his eyes. Desert Hawk is sealed, sir? Not anymore. Thornhill has theater command authority. He can unseal anything he wants within his operational area. Reed paused. Whatever is in those files, whatever really happened, it's all going to come out. You understand that? Yes, sir. Is there anything you want to tell me before you go in there? Kira considered the question. Reed had been a good commanding officer, fair, competent, willing to trust his people to do their jobs. He deserved honesty. Operation Desert Hawk was a failure of command, not a failure of intelligence. 12 people died because the operational commander ignored a signals intelligence assessment and relied on what he believed was superior tactical judgment. He was wrong. The after-action report was classified to protect him, not to protect national security. Reed absorbed this information with the same careful neutrality he had shown throughout. And the operational commander was Colonel Marcus Brennan. Yes, sir. And now General Brennan is attempting to discredit you. That is my assessment, sir. Reed nodded slowly. Then I guess tomorrow is going to be interesting. Good luck, Master Chief. And for what it's worth, I believe you. The USS Ronald Reagan was a floating city of steel and aviation fuel, home to more than 5,000 sailors and Marines. The Strategic Operations Center was deep in the ship's interior, a high-tech nerve center filled with tactical displays and secure communication systems. The room could coordinate operations across thousands of miles of ocean and airspace. Today, it was being used as a courtroom. Kira arrived at 0745, early as always. She wore her dress blues, every ribbon and device in its exact regulation position. The Bronze Star was not among them. That medal was still in General Brennan's pocket, as far as she knew. Admiral Emmett Thornhill was already present reviewing documents at a table in the center of the room. He was in his early 60s, with iron gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he had spent his fair share of time on deck in bad weather. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing that of a man comfortable with authority. He looked up as Kira entered. "Master Chief Blackwood, thank you for your punctuality. Please take a seat." She sat in one of the chairs arranged facing the central table. Over the next 15 minutes, the rest of the participants arrived. Commander Reed, Colonel Drummond there as an observer, Captain Vance Caldwell, and Captain Troy Garrison, both looking uncomfortable but defiant. And finally, General Marcus Brennan himself. Brennan entered with the confidence of a man who believed the situation was under control. He nodded to Admiral Thornhill with the casual familiarity of a peer, then took his seat without looking at Kira. Thornhill waited until everyone was settled, then began. "This inquiry has been convened to address a formal complaint filed by Captain Vance Caldwell, alleging assault by Master Chief Petty Officer Kira Blackwood. However, in the course of reviewing this complaint, additional matters have come to my attention that require examination. We will address all of these matters today fully and completely." He looked at Caldwell. "Captain, please state your complaint for the record." Caldwell sat up straighter. His right arm was in a sling, though Kira suspected the injury was not severe enough to require that level of immobilization. Theatrics for effect. "Sir, on October 25th, at approximately 18:05 hours, I approached Master Chief Blackwood in the dining facility to engage in what I believed would be a professional conversation. Without warning or provocation, she physically attacked me using what I believe was some form of martial arts technique. She twisted my arm in a manner that caused significant pain and potential injury. I believe this was an unprovoked assault and should be subject to disciplinary action under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Thornhill listened without expression. When Caldwell finished, the Admiral nodded to a technician. "Play the dining facility footage, all angles synchronized." The large tactical display that normally showed operational maps and target data flickered to life. 3 camera angles appeared side by side, showing the incident from different perspectives. The audio was crisp and clear. Every word Caldwell had said was audible. His mocking tone, his deliberately provocative stance, and then unmistakably his hand reaching out to grab Kira's shoulder. The footage showed Kira's response in perfect detail. The fluid economy of motion, the precise control, the complete absence of excessive force. It was a textbook defensive maneuver executed with the kind of calm precision that could only come from extensive training. The room was silent as the video played. When it finished, Thornhill looked at Caldwell. "Captain, the video appears to contradict your statement. It clearly shows that you initiated physical contact. Master Chief Blackwood's response appears to be a textbook application of non-lethal defensive force. The complaint is dismissed." Caldwell's face flushed red. Garrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "However," Thornhill continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "this incident did not occur in a vacuum. Captain Caldwell. Captain Garrison, you are both assigned to General Brennan's personal staff. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," they answered in unison. And this confrontation occurred 2 days after General Brennan publicly confiscated Master Chief Blackwood's Bronze Star Medal at an awards ceremony. A ceremony that was attended by hundreds of personnel and multiple media representatives. The room seemed to grow colder. Brennan leaned forward slightly. "Admiral, if I may." "You may not, General, not yet." Thornhill's voice was like ice. "I have reviewed the footage from that ceremony as well. I have read the citation from Master Chief Blackwood's Bronze Star, and I have read the operational reports from Operation Serpent's Coil." He turned his gaze to Kira. "Master Chief, I would like you to explain for the record, and in detail, your specific contribution to Operation Serpent's Coil." The citation uses the term critical signals intelligence support. I want to understand exactly what that means. This was the moment. The opportunity Drummond had told her would come. The chance to present the facts to let the signal speak for itself. Kira stood. Permission to use the tactical display, Admiral? Granted. She moved to the display console and interfaced it with a datapad she had brought. The map of the operational area appeared zooming in on a dense urban sector in eastern Afghanistan. Then the electromagnetic spectrum overlay loaded, and the display filled with a complex web of colored lines and symbols. This is the electromagnetic spectrum of the target area for the 72 hours preceding Operation Serpent's Coil. She began, her voice steady and professional. As you can see, it is saturated with civilian traffic, military communications, and background noise. The target, known as the Viper, utilized a polymorphic frequency-hopping communication system with encrypted burst transmissions. These transmissions were specifically designed to be indistinguishable from background noise. She manipulated the display. Most of the colored lines vanished, leaving only a shimmering haze that looked like digital static. Standard analysis protocols could identify no usable pattern. The signals appeared to be random atmospheric phenomena. However, no electronic system is perfect. Every piece of hardware has a unique physical signature. Imperfections in crystal oscillators, microsecond delays in power amplifiers. These imperfections create a recurring error pattern, a digital fingerprint that exists regardless of encryption or frequency hopping. Her fingers moved across the datapad. A single thread of light, impossibly faint, began to resolve within the static. A recurring pattern invisible to conventional analysis, but undeniable once isolated. I designed an analysis algorithm that ignored message content entirely. Instead, it analyzed the carrier wave itself, searching for this repeating hardware signature. The algorithm required 48 hours of processing time to isolate it from the background noise. The thread of light solidified, leading to a single building in a crowded city block. I cross-referenced the signal origin with thermal imaging from an RQ-170 Sentinel drone that I had requested be repositioned to the area. The building showed a heat signature consistent with multiple occupants and significant electronic equipment in a sub-level basement. I passed these specific coordinates to Task Force Command at 0441 Zulu on the morning of October 21st. She zoomed the display to show the building in detail. Alpha Company was dispatched. Mission success. 0 friendly casualties. She paused, then added quietly, they were sent to that objective based solely on the intelligence I provided. I did not support the operation. I enabled it. Without that, signals intelligence, the Viper would still be operational. The room was utterly silent. The display showed the building, the faint pattern still pulsing a visual representation of the invisible war Kira fought every day. Thornhill studied the display, then looked at Brennan. His expression was unreadable, but there was something cold and hard in his eyes. General Brennan, your after-action report for Operation Serpent's Coil credited aggressive patrolling and tactical initiative by Alpha Company for locating the target. There is no mention of specific signals intelligence. There is no mention of Master Chief Blackwood's contribution beyond a generic acknowledgement of intelligence support. Brennan's face was carefully neutral. The report followed standard classification protocols, Admiral. Specific intelligence methods and sources are typically not included in unclassified after-action summaries. I'm not reading from an unclassified summary, General. I'm reading from the full classified report, the one you filed, and in that report, you minimize the role of signals intelligence and emphasize the combat actions of the ground force. Why? I wanted to ensure that the soldiers who put themselves in harm's way received appropriate recognition, sir. At the expense of accurate reporting. No, sir. I believe the report is accurate. Thornhill let that statement hang in the air for a moment. Then he said, let's discuss Operation Desert Hawk. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Brennan's neutral expression cracked slightly. Caldwell and Garrison looked confused. Kira remained standing by the display, her face calm. Operation Desert Hawk, Thornhill continued, was conducted in 2009 in the tribal areas of Pakistan. The objective was to capture or kill a high-value target. The operation resulted in 12 American fatalities and 17 wounded. The target escaped. General Brennan, you were the operational commander. Is that correct? I was a colonel at the time, sir. But yes, I commanded that operation. Master Chief Blackwood was part of the intelligence team supporting that operation. Is that also correct? I believe so, sir. She provided a signals intelligence assessment indicating the target was at a specific compound. However, you chose to assault a different location. Why? Brennan took a breath. The intelligence was flagged as low confidence due to atmospheric interference. Aerial reconnaissance suggested a secondary location that appeared to be a more probable target site. I made a command decision to prioritize the higher confidence intelligence. The aerial reconnaissance was higher confidence. Yes, sir. And yet it was wrong. The target was at the location Master Chief Blackwood had identified. Pakistani forces raided that compound 3 days after your operation and found evidence of recent occupation by the target and his network. Yes, sir. That is correct. So 12 Americans died because you chose to ignore signals, intelligence in favor of what you believed was superior tactical judgment. Brennan's face flushed. With respect, Admiral, command decisions in combat are complex. Multiple intelligence streams, time pressure, incomplete information. I made the best decision I could with the information available at the time. And then you classified the after-action report at a level that made it inaccessible for standard review. You buried it, General. You buried a catastrophic failure of command because you didn't want anyone examining your decision-making process too closely. I classified it to protect intelligence sources and methods, sir. Did you? Thornhill's voice was cutting now. Or did you classify it to protect your own career? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent the last 3 years ensuring that no one could review what actually happened in Desert Hawk. And when Master Chief Blackwood, one of the analysts whose intelligence you ignored, was about to receive public recognition for her work on a subsequent operation, you saw a threat. You saw someone who might eventually ask questions about Desert Hawk. So you preemptively discredited her. You took her medal, and you humiliated her in front of hundreds of people, hoping that if she ever did speak up, no one would take her seriously. That is not what happened, Admiral. Isn't it? Then explain to me why you felt it necessary to confiscate her Bronze Star. Explain to me why you publicly stated that her contribution was mere support not worthy of recognition. Explain to me why you characterized her work as pushing paper while real soldiers fought. Brennan opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Thornhill pressed forward. I've been in naval intelligence for 30 years, General. I understand the electromagnetic spectrum. I understand signals analysis. What Master Chief Blackwood does is not support. It is not passive. It is not secondary. It is hunting. She hunts signals the way a sniper hunts targets. And she is extraordinarily good at it. The fact that you cannot or will not recognize that says more about your limitations as a commander than it does about her value as an intelligence professional. The Admiral stood, his presence filling the room. This inquiry is concluded. My findings are as follows. First, the complaint against Master Chief Blackwood is dismissed with prejudice. Captain Caldwell, you initiated unwanted physical contact and you suffered the consequences. Consider yourself fortunate that she exercised restraint. Second, General Brennan, you have misrepresented a tactical operation to your superiors and to the public. You have buried evidence of command failure, and you have attempted to discredit a decorated senior non-commissioned officer in what appears to be an act of preemptive damage control. Thornhill's voice dropped to something just above a whisper, but every word cut like a blade. My report to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs will reflect these findings in detail. You will be subject to a formal investigation. And General Brennan, I would start thinking very carefully about your retirement plans because your career is over. Brennan's face had gone from red to pale. He sat frozen, the full implications of what had just happened slowly sinking in. Caldwell and Garrison looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Thornhill turned to Kira. Master Chief Blackwood, please approach. She walked to stand before the Admiral. He reached into a case on the table and removed a velvet box. He opened it to reveal the Bronze Star medal, the same medal that Brennan had taken from her 5 days earlier. I retrieved this from General Brennan's personal effects yesterday, Thornhill said. On behalf of the United States Armed Forces, I apologize. Your skill and dedication saved American lives and ensured the success of a critical mission. We are honored by your service. He leaned forward and carefully pinned the medal to her uniform just above her service ribbons. Then he stepped back and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. For a moment, he held it alone. Then Colonel Drummond rose from his observer's seat and snapped his own hand up in salute. Commander Reed followed. Even the technicians in the room came to attention. Only Brennan, Caldwell, and Garrison remained seated, isolated in their disgrace. Kira returned the salute, her movements precise and controlled. But inside, something had shifted. A weight she had carried for 3 years, the weight of Desert Hawk and Becca, and the question of whether she had done enough, whether she had been good enough, that weight began to lift. The system had corrected itself. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The following morning, the entire task force assembled on the parade ground at FOB Sentinel. The air was cool for once, the sun just beginning to climb above the mountains. There were no media present. This was not for them. This was internal. This was for the people who did the work, who understood what it meant. Admiral Thornhill stood at the podium. General Brennan was conspicuously absent. Kira had heard he had been flown back to Washington on the first available transport. In any large organization, errors can be made, Thornhill began, his voice carrying across the silent ranks. Good organizations have the integrity to identify those errors and the courage to correct them. We are here today to correct an error. He called her name. Master Chief Petty Officer Kira Blackwood. She walked forward, the same economical movements, the same perfect stillness. She halted before the Admiral and saluted. This time there was no confiscation, no dismissal, no contempt. Master Chief, Thornhill said. And this time his words were his own, not read from a script. 5 days ago, you were denied recognition you had earned. That was wrong. Today we correct that wrong. But more importantly, today we acknowledge a fundamental truth about modern warfare. The electromagnetic spectrum is a battlefield as real as any mountain or valley. The people who fight there are warriors, as surely as any infantryman or pilot. And you, Master Chief, are among the finest warriors I have had the honor to serve with. He paused, looking out at the assembled formation. This medal represents more than one successful operation. It represents a career of excellence. It represents dedication to a craft that most people will never see or understand. It represents the quiet professionalism of someone who does not seek recognition, but deserves it nonetheless. The Admiral held the salute. From the front rank, Gunnery Sergeant Deanna Wolfe raised her hand in salute, her movements sharp and precise. The gesture seemed to break a spell. Like a wave spreading across water, every single person on that parade ground raised their hands in salute. Thousands of them, a sea of hands held steady in the desert morning. It was a thunderous, silent roar of respect. Kira stood at the center of it all, the bronze star finally in its proper place on her uniform, and felt her eyes begin to burn. She did not cry. She had not cried in public since she was a child, but the emotion was there, controlled but present, a crack in the armor she had maintained for so long. The salute held for 10 seconds. 15, 20. Then Thornhill dropped his hand, and the wave reversed, thousands of hands dropping in unison. Dismissed, Thornhill said quietly. 1 week later, Kira was back in her workspace. The container was quiet, except for the hum of cooling fans and the occasional beep of incoming data. The holographic map of her next operational area floated before her, a new puzzle waiting to be solved. Commander Reed appeared in her doorway. Master Chief, got a minute? Of course, sir. He entered and closed the door behind him. I just got off a secure video call with the Director of National Intelligence. He read Admiral Thornhill's report in full. Your next assignment has been approved. Project Trident. Kira nodded. Project Trident was the next evolution of signals intelligence, a program so classified that most of the intelligence community knew it only as rumor. It was the kind of assignment that came once in a career, if at all. When do I transfer, sir? 3 months. They want you to finish out this deployment first, then you'll rotate back to Fort Meade for integration and training. Reed paused. Master Chief, about what happened here. With Brennan, the ceremony, all of it. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Kira turned away from the display to look at him directly. Her face was calm, illuminated by the shifting blue light of the hologram. Correction was achieved, sir. Reed studied her for a moment, then nodded. He understood. In her world, in the world of signals and patterns and careful documentation, that was what mattered. Not vindication, not revenge. Correction. The system had identified an error and fixed it. Fair enough. Carry on, Master Chief. After he left, Kira returned her attention to the map. A new target, a new pattern to find, a new conversation to be had across the invisible distances of the electromagnetic spectrum. But before she began the analysis, before she dove back into the world of signals and patterns, she allowed herself one moment of stillness. She thought about Becca, about a young woman with blonde hair and terrible jokes who had believed in the mission, who had trusted the intelligence, who had done everything right and still died because someone in command had chosen ego over truth. For 3 years, Kira had carried the weight of that loss, had wondered if she could have done more, been more convincing, found a way to make Brennan listen. Now, she knew the answer. She had done everything right. Becca's death was not her failure. It was Brennan's. And the system, for all its flaws and delays and bureaucratic inertia, had finally acknowledged that truth. The bronze star on her chest was not just for Serpent's Coil. It was for every signal she had ever found, every pattern she had ever identified, every invisible battlefield she had ever fought on. It was for the work that no one saw, the victories that went uncelebrated, the quiet professionalism of people who saved lives without ever firing a shot. But more than that, it was a promise that Becca's death had not been meaningless, that the lessons of Desert Hawk would be learned, that intelligence would not be dismissed, that analysts would not be silenced, that the quiet professionals in the shadows would be heard when it mattered most. Kira Blackwood returned her focus to the screen. The new signal was complex, layered, challenging. Exactly the kind of problem she had spent 15 years training to solve. She cracked her knuckles once, a rare gesture of preparation, and began to type. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, and the hologram shifted layers of data, resolving into preliminary patterns. Somewhere out there, an enemy was transmitting. Somewhere in the chaos of the electromagnetic spectrum, there was a pattern waiting to be found, and she would find it. Because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. She fought a war most people would never know existed, and she was very, very good at it. The container was quiet, except for the hum of machines and the soft clicking of keys. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the base came to life with the sounds of morning. But in here, in this small, dark space, filled with technology and purpose, Kira Blackwood sat at the center of her own battlefield and prepared for the next fight. The bronze star gleamed on her uniform, finally in its proper place. But it was just metal and ribbon. The real victory was in the work, in the mission, in the knowledge that when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance, she could find the signal in the noise. That was her weapon. That was her war. And it was a war she intended to keep winning, one transmission at a time, one pattern at a time, one impossible target at a time. The hunt continued. The war went on, and in the darkness of her container, lit only by the glow of her screens, Master Chief Kira Blackwood did what she had always done. She found the signal in the noise. One transmission at a time, one pattern at a time, one impossible target at a time. For Becca, for the 12, for everyone who trusted that when the intelligence was right, someone would listen. And now, finally, they would. In the hologram before her, a new anomaly emerged. A microsecond delay. A tiny imperfection in a crystal oscillator. The signature of an enemy who thought himself invisible. Kira smiled just slightly. She had found it.